Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Dedicated Show. My name is Kate Strasnik. I'm the host of the Dedicated Show and the founder of Dedicated. Today, we're going to talk to you about the 5 stages of analytical maturity. And our special guest of the day is Steve Brodrick. He is the Chief Transformation Officer at Alteryx. As you're joining, very few reminders for those who are maybe new to the show. We do take questions from the live audience. So if you have a question, if you have a comment on something that we're talking about, please feel free to jump into the comments either on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or Twitch, or anywhere else you see this stream. As you're joining, we also have a question for you. So the question here is, are most of the companies you've worked with, do you consider them to be analytically mature or immature? We will get to some more definitions in terms of what does it actually mean to be mature or immature, but I think it'll be interesting to hear from the audience sort of, what have you seen in terms of the companies that you've actually worked for? All right, I'm going to go ahead and quickly check in on the comments. I see Ravit's here, Herb's is here. Awesome. Susan Walsh joining us. Dustin, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for supporting us. I am going to go ahead and bring Steve onto the stage here. Hello, Steve. Welcome to the Dedicated Show.
It's good to be here, Kate. How are you?
I am doing great. I remember saying at my last show to my audience, this is my absolute last show of the year. And then here's Alteryx, and here we are. I simply can't stop having fun. I'm sure this is not actually the last live show either, because I simply enjoy talking to people so much. I'm noticing, so you heard me ask the question, right? If most companies people consider to be mature or immature in terms of analytics, and we've got some answers. So we've got immature, in the middle, work in progress, mature. Okay, some are saying just born, which I thought that was hilarious. They're just, not only are they immature, they're just little babies. So before we get into maturity and your thoughts on what's happening in this space, I think it would be great to start with an introduction, tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you're currently doing at Alteryx.
No, that's great. Thanks, Kate. And I just realized Kate and I aren't too far from each other. I'm in Connecticut here at my home, and she's in New Jersey. But so my name's Steve Brodrick. I'm the Chief Transformation Officer here at Alteryx. My background, actually, I've been with Alteryx for about 3.5 months in that capacity, where I help all of our customers with their transformational journeys in various ways. But about 21 years prior to that, I started work at a great company called Stanley Black & Decker. It's the world's largest tool company. And in that company, I was primarily in finance roles. So I was a CFO in multiple divisions within that company. And then about half my time there, I led planning, integration, and global shared services. And then other half of my time there was in leading finance organizations globally inside the company. And in the last few years, I was responsible for advancing what we call performance resiliency, which was really driving analytics, AI, and a data-driven culture inside the company, leveraging COEs and analytics and things that we'll talk about today. So I'm taking those learnings from my past, primarily in finance and operations, and applying them across our customer base here at Alteryx now.
I love it. And 20 plus years at a company, that's sort of unheard of these days. So tell us, what kept you there so long?
It's a great company. I think it was always a new challenge, and the company happened to grow almost 7 or 8 times the size of when I started back in 2001. So when you're in finance and you have that accountability across the organization, have a seat at the table and help drive decision-making strategy, it was really a great experience for me.
Nice. And do you have a favorite role that you held over the past 20 years there?
Yeah, I would say the one leading performance resiliency for the company was really, really interesting. It was actually something that, I don't have an advanced data science degree, Kate, as you know, but I certainly have a lot of, roles I've been in inside Stanley Black & Decker previously, where I had experience across ops, commercial, finance, of course. But in all cases, I would just be reflecting on, boy, those teams I was leading would just be so much better if they had better access to data and insights and really driving decisions faster and things like that. So that role, I had the chance to partner with our IT organization at Stanley and really drive an analytics team, an insights team, change management, and lean process design. So we kind of had all the elements that you would think of when you're trying to mature analytics and create value and really empower teams in the company. So that was very far reaching, and something that I, was interested in because it was involving something that I'd seen as a challenge when I was in various roles that I could help solve for when I was helping lead that across the teams at Stanley. So
If only there was a company that can help you solve those challenges, right, Steve?
like Alteryx.
Oh my goodness, yes, wow. So you're at Alteryx now. I'd love to hear about sort of what learnings you're taking from that lengthy experience at Stanley Black and Decker, and how you're applying this to Alteryx.
Yeah, so it's, I was a customer of Alteryx obviously when I was at Stanley Black and Decker, so we were scaling up with the platform. But one thing I reflect on that I still use today when I meet with customers that was very relevant for Stanley Black and Decker was the most progressive companies are growing. They have more data than they had yesterday. They're more complex, and the environment that they're all operating in is more volatile, right? So in that circumstance, the value of integrating your data sets more cleanly, having data at your fingertips, not just in one organization, but really across the entire enterprise is really the goal of many companies when they think about maturity. And that's really what Alteryx does. We help companies organize their data sets, provide a platform for them to automate workflows and really help change, I'll say, innovation, the way people can innovate at the point of impact, really looking at insights in different ways and creating value. And it's pretty empowering to see that occur and then drive different decisions in the company. So my role here takes, an understanding for some of the struggles and challenges you have in a large, diversified industrial like Stanley Black and Decker, right?
Right.
But then apply it to many industries. So
Absolutely. And a comment here from Dustin. He says, I think it's great when business leaders move into data related roles. And, I just wanted to touch on that. So you were a customer of Alteryx, and you were on the side of, oh man, I wish I could improve on this and this, and I wish Alteryx could do that. And now you're on the other side where you can actually implement some of those changes or struggles that you might have faced being a customer. Did you have any of those moments, I guess, in this short 3.5 months that you've been with Alteryx?
Yeah, for sure. I had some learnings when I was going through integrating data sets inside Stanley Black and Decker. And the interesting thing about it is when I've met with, many customers inside Alteryx, they have some of the same struggles and, the things that they're trying to do to accomplish, better data sources, more linkages between those data sources, what their teams decide on, and decisions impacts day to day. So those parallels between what I was helping solve for inside my past role are very relevant. And the thing I've learned too is it doesn't matter if you're a healthcare industry, if you're a manufacturer, if you're an airline. I met with some banks last week. The industries are different, but I think that comment that came up from earlier that said, data, everybody has seen an explosion of data, and it's how you organize it and create value with it and empower your teams with it. That becomes really an important part of most CFOs or transformation leaders or analytics leaders' agendas that I talk with. So I think there's definitely some parallels there between some of the things I was thinking through and operationalizing in Stanley Black and Decker and then what I see in our customers today.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. We've got a question here from Susan. She's asking, do you think that you have an advantage having come from a finance/business background?
Yeah, good question, Susan. I think for sure that was the case for me because in my past role, finance you could go deep in anything, but you kind of went a mile wide and inch deep across many things. So in some cases, as a finance leader, you're leading integrations. I had accountability for that in a couple roles inside my past experience. And then you met with commercial folks, you met with operations folks. I was deeply involved in supply chain and distribution. So I think by virtue of sometimes having the purse strings, where you're accountable for the budgets and where investments are made, it allows you that avenue to get into decisions or things that your teams are thinking about, and it doesn't only have to be finance. So I think that's made me better served here at Alteryx. Now I can understand how people think, not just from a finance lens, but through other functional areas or business disciplines. So I think data, it's one thing I like about data analytics. It kind of connects all across those continuums, right? So it's never a dull moment, but it's really interesting because no 2 days can be the same.
Yes, absolutely. So we're here today to talk about analytics maturity. I think it would be great to start with just sort of the baseline. What is analytical maturity and why is it important?
Yeah. So, when I think about analytics maturity, it's more about how to leverage analytics and data inside a company, right? So, um, that's a simple interpretation of a pretty massive topic, right? But I think the interesting thing about why it's important is a lot of companies are really going to how they mature analytics to create value inside their
Mhm.
companies and minimize risk, and but also there's a growing need to really empower teams in different ways. And sometimes the complexities that a company's facing, it's very hard to do things manually or without automation or without analytics at your side. So the interesting thing, we've done some work at Alteryx with a company called the International Institute for Analytics,
Mhm.
and they're a partner, organization that we've worked with, and they've done some research of hundreds, literally hundreds of the top companies, logos that all of your folks here on the webcast would probably recognize. And what's interesting to me is if you look at those that are more analytically mature versus the ones that are kind of at the earlier spectrum of analytics maturity, over a 3, 5, 10-year time period, their financial performance is somewhere between 2, 3, in some cases even 4 times higher when you
Wow.
look at just the straight up performance of those companies. So when I looked at that and learned that a few months ago, I reflected on it and said, I can see how that might be. And the fact that it's any, duration of time that you look at means that there's something really powerful within there.
Right. So maturity equals money. That's what I wrote down from all that. Because I mean, it's true, right? Based on the data that you've analyzed, or that the International Institute for Analytics has analyzed,
Yep.
and I think most would agree with that, right? If you've got your data collection, your all those processes in order, if you're actually using your data to your advantage, being competitive with how you use data, then ideally, and I would think obviously, you should be more competitive on the revenue as well. Now, so you mentioned the IIA, which I'll call for short now, that
Yeah.
there are 5 stages of analytics maturity, right? Um, so I wanted to just get a sense for, that question we started with in the front, in the beginning of our talk, where I asked the audience what they're thinking. Most people, I don't think a single person said mature, by the way. It was either just
I
born
did
or
see it. Yeah.
immature or somewhere growing. So from those 5 stages, what have you seen as, I guess, the benchmark? Are they more in the beginning stages, or are companies in that final stage of maturity?
Yeah. So I'll go back to, I could bring in my experience over the last few months meeting with 20 or 30 customers and then what the IAA would tell us.
Yeah.
Um, but on average, and there's multiple hundreds of companies that that have taken that maturity assessment, but the average company scores himself at 2.2.
Hmm.
So I've been with some, banks, some healthcare companies, some retailers, one digital native company, and I can say there's a whole spectrum of analytics maturity in there. But it is very rare for me to see and stumble on a executive meeting or a meeting with folks who are in the analytics teams in those companies to see an environment where the data foundation is very clean.
Hmm.
Processes are all automated, and the organization is completely behind in understanding, what is happening with analytics and what value you can create for them. It's just very, when you think about how massive that is, what I just said, a
Yeah.
lot of companies are on that journey, but very few are, let's say, a 4 or 5. So I think the 2.2 to me seems to make sense. And a lot of companies are crawling up from being beginners to really trying to leverage their companies and advantage, their teams around better analytics maturity. So somewhere in the, maybe a little left to center, I would say, is where most companies are.
Okay, and I'll share a quick slide here that basically shows the 5 stages. So you've got in the beginning analytics beginner, localized analytics aspirations, analytics company, and then analytical competitors. And there's that 2.2. I think it's interesting because most companies would probably say they want to be at the top, right? I don't think there's one that says, "Oh, we just want to be in stage one for now. Like we're good. We don't want to do better with data." So I'm wondering what is stopping them from moving up this maturity scale.
Yeah, there's various answers I would have to that, but I think one of them is awareness for what it can do. I mean, sometimes you'll have some portion of the organization who really has seen what great looks like in analytics and are pressing forward for that. But it just takes a ton of convincing and showing the art of possible for companies that, let's say, have tens of thousands of employees to really understand that. So I think that's a journey that companies are on that is not one where there's a easy button, unfortunately, right? The other one is funding, because when I think about analytics maturity, you're right. I think when surveyed, 92% or something like that of CFOs last October, I think Gartner did a survey, said they were either hold their analytics investment or increase it, even given that we're in the middle or end of the pandemic. So I think that is something that companies evaluate, because you can't really, spend everything on a data environment that takes you 10 years and you don't create any value from. So I think companies think about the fact that they can invest in people, they can invest in technology and tools, and they can invest in their data foundation. So there's some combination of that works for a company, but depending on what the executive support is, that could differ, even if there's an aspiration there. So it really depends on the particular company.
Mm-hmm. And, when we're talking about the stages, I know that Alteryx has an analytics maturity assessment that folks can take. The reason I bring that up is because Dustin just commented that understanding where you are in analytics maturity is so tragically underrated. So wanted to get your thoughts on, do you agree with Dustin's comment? And then we could talk a bit about the assessment that you guys have.
Yeah, Dustin, I agree with that comment, by the way. I think I did it, my past life, and now I encourage other companies to at least take it. It literally takes 15 minutes, but it's hard to figure out a path ahead when you don't have a current status, right? I think it's really advantageous to look at where's the current state of affairs before you think about mapping out a future. So, but that continuum goes, like you said, from scale of 1 to 5, and inside Alteryx, you can go to alteryx.com. Highly would encourage any of you who are participating here on this call. You go to connect and learn, and then you can hit analytics maturity assessment. And it takes somewhere around 15, 20 minutes to do, but it gives you where you fall in. Are you a beginner? Are you, localized? Are you all the way up through what we call analytic company, or even an analytic competitor, where you're using data analytics to an advantage in the marketplace, and you're thinking about new business models using analytics, things like that. So it helps you plot yourself on that spectrum, but it also gives you a very initial assessment of some of the steps you can take to advance, which is really why most people think about A, and even being interested in that topic, but B, trying to figure out where they would fall on that continuum.
Right. I think it's so important, per Dustin's point as well, just to know where you are. This way you know where you need to go. And I know there are 4 primary components that sort of go into giving you that score. I'll share my screen here again. If you can talk through these 4 components and what role they play in that assessment, I think that'll be really helpful.
Yeah, and there are really 4 things, and we look at these across many companies at Alteryx and kind of understand where various companies are at. But on data maturity, the areas that I think about in there are, how integrated your data sets are, not just how integrated, but what's the quality of the data that's represented in those data repositories is equally important sometimes. And then is there common data across the whole enterprise, or how consistent is it, right? So those are some of the things that I think about when I think data maturity. On organization dynamics, that can go a spectrum of, I'll say, awareness for what analytics can do, what I was saying earlier, Kate, all the way up through education and even executive sponsorship. And the other thing that I think about in org dynamics is the aspects of analytics that your team is working through aligned to the business goals or the total company goals. That's something that we look at in that area. Analytics team is pretty important. So is there an analytics team, or is it more localized and scattered from a standpoint of the people that have skill sets around data analytics in a company? So that comes down to, are there a few people who hold the keys to all the data that could be used for decision making, or is it fully democratized in a very mature state where many people in the organization that are at the point of impact and they have a decision to make or analysis to do, they have access to that information set, and they can go and innovate and test and learn on that data. And then the last one is usage and technology. So really what I think about there is how integrated are the transaction systems, and is there an enterprise architecture in place? What are the tools And then also when I think about usage, are we using analytics just to do reporting? Are we using analytics to drive sophisticated machine learning models, or using artificial intelligence to draw predictions on data sets? So that runs a whole gamut from, what's the, usage of the transaction systems all the way up through some of the architectural considerations I mentioned on technology.
Right. Sorry, I went back into a weird screen here. So thank you so much for walking through all four of those. My initial question is, can a company get to stage 4 or 5 without all four of those components being somewhat strong?
Yeah, it's pretty challenging. I mean, I'm trying to think of an example, Kate, where somebody short-circuited without having involvement across the four. And I think it's very challenging to do, because in most cases, even if you are really aspiring to, let's say you have full engagement of your leadership team around analytics.
Mm-hmm.
If you have not taken the approach of really thinking about the importance of enterprise data architecture and how your data sets are represented and the quality of them, you would risk, driving reporting that may not be accurate, right? So thinking about not only the tool set you're using to drive analytics, but also that, the data consistency, the quality of it, that's an important part. And then also just the process side of this, and, what steps are automated, and those things come into play. So I think you can do pockets of analytics without full spectrum, but
Right.
I think if companies are trying to scale, and this is a major part of their endeavors, there's really an approach that we see most progressive companies deploy is looking at all four of these areas and advancing. And then your goal is to figure out, well, where's your funding priority go, or organization point in those specific areas. But they're working on most, if not all of them, simultaneously.
Right. I can't imagine having, great data maturity, organizational dynamics, usage and technology, and no analytics team, right? Like you're not going
That's
very
right.
far with that.
That's right. That's a good example.
Yes. All right. There was a question here from Nadir asking if there are slides available for the 5 stages of analytics maturity. I think once somebody takes the assessment, they get a full report, right, of sort of
Yep.
where they are.
Yeah, you'll get a snapshot of where you're at versus the peer set, and you'll get some level of feedback too on steps that can be taken to advance from where you're at. There's when I look at those stages, it goes all the way from awareness all the way up through, using data as a competitive advantage, et cetera. So some of those aspects, you're probably somewhere between that. It'll tell you where you are and then help you think about strategies going forward.
Okay. And I think Dustin actually shared the link. So thank you, Dustin.
Oh, nice. Yep.
Folks can go ahead and check that out. I actually clicked through the assessment a bit, and I noticed it's mainly drop down, multiple choice.
Yep.
It's very straightforward. So I definitely encourage everyone to, now that Dustin shared the link, go ahead after the show, use the link and see where you fall out. It'd be great if you shared the results on social media as well. And as long as you're okay with sharing those results, not everybody wants to show the world that they're 2.2 or below a 2.2, which is considered below average at this point. But Steve, you mentioned peers, right? So does the assessment actually take into account your company size when they're giving you sort of where you fall out, or is it just in general for everybody who's taking that assessment?
No, I'm just thinking through when I took it. I don't think there's a limiter or an input on size, if I remember right. But it would apply. One thing I would say is it will apply if you're a very small scaled company, all the way up through one of the largest companies in the world, I think, can take this and see value from it. So irrespective of the size of company, these 4 things are very relevant when you think about advancing and driving more data-driven outcomes and driving a culture on analytics. They'll still apply. Okay,
that's great to know. So let's say somebody watched our show, found this link, took the assessment, they got their score. What happens next? What do they do now?
Yeah, so I think the next thing to think about is, where are those points of influence that you can have across some of the things that we talked about earlier. So there'll be a spectrum in there, right? So it could point you toward, if you're just starting to build a data lake or enterprise data warehouse or a cloud environment, that would be one step. But it'll also help you think about beyond the environment that you're in. What are some of the things that you could do to drive communication of wins and engagement as you get deeper into potentially setting up a center of excellence as you advance analytics and some of those aspects. So it'll be different based on your landing spot, what might lie ahead for you. But what it does do is give you a sense for where are you on that scale, and B, irrespective of where your starting point is, gives you some pointers on things that you can address going forward.
And you mentioned center of excellence. I just remember Dustin had another question here. He wanted to hear your thoughts on analytics COEs.
Yeah, Dustin, I think I have the privilege and opportunity I met with, 3 or 4 leaders of COEs inside various companies in the last couple of weeks. There's, first of all, I would say there are centers of excellence and then centers of enablement. And there is a difference between the two. So center of excellence is more helping execute work potentially at a center. So if you're at a corporate center, as an example, you may get economies of scale by having a small dedicated team who's got special expertise in a particular area, let's say machine learning or some form of analytics. But center of enablement is also really valuable because you may have some of those skill sets on your team, but they may be, let's say, a hub that's helping impact the spokes in your business units or functional areas, whatever particular company you're in. And rather than do the work, they're giving you access to tools, maybe even some help on process or training. And then if you're stuck on a workflow or if you're stuck on some analysis, they could be that voice for you to help, leverage their expertise, but then driving something at the point of impact in a particular area or operating unit that you're in. So my take is that most companies, whether it's either one of those, are thinking about, boy, in order to scale, there's probably some value to building a community around people who are, invested and interested in advancing skills in analytics. So I think it's definitely something I advocate for. And then depending on where you're at in the maturity, there are different elements that you may build into a center of excellence or COE enablement as time goes on. But I think it's valuable because you build a community of people who have common orientation toward solutioning. And in a lot of cases, the people in the COE can help others learn. And you may have people from the business units that come work in the COE and vice versa. So it creates kind of that organizational aspect that many companies strive for. We have people that are gaining disciplines in a particular area that can apply it somewhere else. And that just helps companies scale their outcomes looking to drive with analytics.
I would assume companies that have an established center of excellence for analytics are probably further along that spectrum.
Yeah, they're certainly advancing, right? Because what they're doing is they're taking certain skill sets who have specialized skills or can help others learn, and they're trying to scale that wider. And I think that's where you go from somebody with aspiration, they want to be involved in analytics, to actually operationalizing a team around it. And then ultimately, as you get into that 4 or 5 spectrum, you're actually scaling analytics. That's very hard to do if you're kind of operating in local optimums where people within those various pieces of a company aren't really talking with each other or conversing on the latest technologies or what the tools and techniques are that are driving automation and value. So I think there's a big benefit to most companies that undertake that.
And have you seen any companies sort of surprised at where they end up? Have you ever heard of a company who maybe thought that they were pretty advanced in the analytics maturity, but then they took the assessment and they're like, oh no, we have work to do?
There's been maybe 1 or 2 I'd put in that category, but I'm just thinking the more recent ones I worked with were right in that low 2 zone, actually. And they weren't shocked, actually. They thought they were worse.
Okay.
And when they reflected on things that they had done or put in place, they're like, oh yeah, we did an analytics day, or we had engagement at a senior executive level, or we are funded on certain projects, even though we're not doing it at scale. So, it's a continuum in there. But I don't think I've had a customer or analytics leader or transformation leader come to me and say, geez, I thought I was further on the spectrum. I think a lot of them are by nature very curious about what it takes to get to high end of that spectrum, but they all point toward things that they really want to do to drive further automation or democratize insights across their team in a different way, or use tools and tech to help save time and create capacity, things like that.
All right. So how old is this assessment? When did it come out? I'm assuming it's more than 3.5 months, right? This assessment came out before you joined Alteryx?
Yeah, I mean, I took it when I was at Stanley Black & Decker. So
that was my next question. Did you take the assessment, and how did you do?
Yeah, we were in the 2.4-ish, I think is what I scored myself.
Above
For
average.
the
Look
company,
at that.
So we were a little bit higher than average, but we also were, we weren't scaled either. We were doing certain MVPs and we had a center of enablement and center of excellence. But when I think about scaling up and having the quality of our data over time, being something that we were engaging in, those things were all in motion, but I wouldn't say we were scaled yet on those. They were things that we were evolving. So
Okay.
yeah, so a little bit better than average, but you could tell there's a roadmap ahead for us there too, even though we were, taking, a lot of levers to drive analytic excellence.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for being so open about that. I
Yeah.
didn't expect an actual number. I thought you'll say above or below, but okay, awesome.
Yep. A little bit above average.
Okay, good. So a question here from Ryan. He says, where do you see the greatest incremental lift for the time, resources, dollars invested to move the needle within an organization that's just starting its analytics journey?
Yeah. So the greatest lift, I would say, Ryan, let me speak to it this way. I think at the early stages, what I recommend is trying to get some executive sponsorship for it. I think is pretty important because some of these, basically all of these, take an effort of people, time, or tools and tech, or data foundation, et cetera. So I think the way I've seen it advance really well is if you have somebody who's sponsoring it inside a company, but also the people that know the best where the value is are in a role where they're dealing with complexity or dealing with manual work. So what really works well early stages is when you can have sponsorship where there's something that can be created that is valuable, but you also have advocacy or awareness or people who are using and adopting tools at the point of impact who are making progress and demonstrating that, okay, the vision that we're on makes sense and here's where we can scale from here to drive more success. So I think almost like think about it as, support at a senior level, but also those who are closest to the action, getting in, testing it, learning, driving value, automating work. That's usually a good combination early stage, because if you don't have those wins or points on the board, it becomes challenging.
Right. Showing some quick wins early on, I think, can really help show that value. And speaking of progression, so John has a question here. Is the progression through the 5 stages constrained by the quality of the upstream feedback? If so, how do you fix that? And maybe as you talk through this, just tell us other constraints of moving up those stages.
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think about those constraints, John. What are the most important ones to your question, Kate? I would say advocacy is tough, right? So you may be having discussions as you evolve on that continuum that are where you've had progress, but you want to take investments and drive further, and you need support. In a lot of cases, people are a little bit suspect of, well, can you really create value with this, or can it automate to a point where you can save a lot of time in a closing cycle, things like that. So where I think a lot of companies struggle is on that. And one of the tools you can use is, communication of wins and things that you're doing. They're advancing on the, ages or the stages that we talked about. And I think that's one. And secondly, there are pioneers in the analytics space that sometimes are these folks who see value because they're the ones dealing with complexity or trying to minimize risk or do things faster and provide better decisions. And if they're working with tools and technologies that are helping drive that, it's just an amazing thing to have support or sponsorship for those, or recognize those folks as really leading the charge and frankly just driving innovation, how work is done, right?
Right.
So if there's a way to get people using tools and driving analytics, but then have a recognition process and communicate those wins, that's where a lot of companies stumble, because they forget that this takes change. And it also takes, in the case of a large company, you have a certain amount of people that are working inside data analytics, and then a much broader community outside of that are on the outside looking in to some extent, wanting to understand more about it. So you've got to put the right communication mechanisms in place to really drive success. And I think that's where a lot of companies get a little stuck.
And do you think it gets harder as you get more mature? So is it easier to go from 1 to 2 versus 3 to 4 in terms of stages?
Yeah, I think the parallel between your data, I'll say cleanliness and consistency, and then driving analytic efforts. I think early stages, you don't necessarily need the entire data repository clean to drive value in a particular pocket. So
Mm-hmm.
there can be advancements you make early days without a full scale, you know, data and technology stack. But as you get into the middle, right, and you're looking, so you have wins in analytics and data, and you're driving value and you're powering teams, but you're wanting to go to that 4 or 5 stage, Kate,
Mm-hmm.
you have to really continue working on things like the quality of your data, the tool sets that people are using to help automate and drive consistent approaches with the data sets, right?
Right.
But then you're talking about, what was previously in the hands of a few in small data. Now you're talking, if you're a large scale company, it's just a lot more involved because you're tackling some pretty big challenges. And in that case, you need to work your foundation plus your tool set and the people and skills that are coming along with that. So I think I would say probably, as you get up into the higher continuum of analytics maturity, it doesn't get easier because
Mm.
you're operating at a scale that, really requires a lot of people to come along.
Right. I guess you're facing different problems at each level as well.
Yep. Yep.
And how does Alteryx actually help fix some of those problems or, overcome some of those challenges and help companies move up that maturity scale?
Yeah, so I think it does a lot. I mean, obviously, I'm passionate about it. Came here to help companies learn tools and techniques to help them with that. Number one is just the world is so complex and volatile that I think automating work and driving analytics to help support decision making is something that many, if not most, companies are trying to solve for. But if you don't have a tool set or a platform that helps you do that,
Mm-hmm.
it can be really challenging, right? So one of the best things about Alteryx is for those who don't know coding, or they've never worked in R or Python, but they have a desire to really drive analytic outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
With pretty minimal training, you get to learn our platform and go in and start to link data sources. And then off the back of those data source linkages, you can drive, try to solve and analytically approach your problem set and then report off the back of it. And, you can do that in a pretty small amount of time. And I think that's where there's a huge advantage to, again, people who are closest to, a problem set or challenge or opportunity in HR or finance or commercial, them having those keys and be able to work through solutioning is just so essential. So I think that's a major part about it. The second thing is, frankly, you create a community of people who know Alteryx inside your company, and it typically scales from there because they're creating value. And then you have the power of many to help you with some of the more complex challenges you're trying to solve. And then there's a community of almost 400,000 people on Alteryx where that community helps each other with workflows, and they're really energized by automating work and driving analytics more broadly. So they'll help each other out. And it's amazing to me to think that most workflow challenges or opportunities that are presented on that site are answered in like within 35 minutes, I think, or something like that.
Wow.
So it's quicker than you can kind of order food to your house. And I think that says something about there's a really engaged community around how much power there is to, using a platform to unlock insights and create value and simplify work and standardize and reduce risk. So
I love
it does
it.
a lot of things.
It makes me want to order a pizza and then ask a question at the same time and see what comes first. The
See
answer.
whether the pizza comes first or the answer set, right?
Or the answer, exactly. But 400,000, I mean, that's the community itself is just so engaging and so giving that I love that. Absolutely. And that does make a world of difference. We
Yeah,
had
one
a
person
question.
told me, Kate, like
Yeah.
people that get deep in the analytics space, they really care about helping other people.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I really think that's true. Like there's nothing that thrills me more than if I can help a customer that's really trying to advance their maturity, understand a pathway that helps their teams be empowered and then drive decision making and value and automation. So I think there's a piece there of that community you just mentioned. They really do want to help each other out. It's an interesting thing about the community.
Yes, absolutely. We had a question here from Jai. I attended the Alteryx Inspire on tour event in Mumbai. Alteryx Designer Cloud will be a game changer. What are your thoughts on that, Steve?
I think so too. I'm glad you attended that. First of all, I could not make that one, unfortunately, but I was at the one in Amsterdam and, of course, in Denver. But yeah, I think we want to go where our customers are going, and it's no secret that many of our customers are migrating to the cloud if they're not already there. And we want our customers to be able to leverage our platform on-prem and also be able to be present in their cloud environments or some hybrid environment. So we partner with the world's largest cloud providers as part of that. And then we're very interested in advancing our platform into the cloud and driving that as a key strategy for Alteryx. So I'm thrilled that you're thrilled, because that's absolutely a major investment strategy for us, and something that we're very excited about.
It's good to see other people excited about the thing you're excited about, right?
Yeah, that's great. I love that question.
It's working. It's doing the right thing. All right, more questions. We'll just spend another few minutes on questions before we wrap. So, question from John here: do graph technologies and semantics fit into the data analytics space?
Yeah, so I think it's something where what I would mention to you on that one, John, is they fit in there because obviously people were trying to decision something. Typically, they're looking at a data set, but it's partly that visualization that is helping them, I'll say in a quick way, formulate what they can take for a decision differently, right? So I think the one thing about Alteryx that's interesting is that even though it can help you with ETL and connecting data sources that are either inside your company or outside your company, we then can run workflows and automate those aspects, but then push it back through your, I'll call it, presentation layer in your visualization tools. So for me, from my past life, it would be taking those models and visualizing those either in Power BI or Tableau, which is some of our partners. And also you could use analytic apps to do that as well. So there's a couple different ways to leverage either our platform or other tools and technologies that you're used to help you when you get to that point you really need to make a decision or do something differently, and help it shine a light on that.
Awesome, thank you. Next question comes from Josh. Who should the analytics team report up to, and how does that change as your organization/analytics team matures?
Yeah, good one, John. Who should the team report up to? I've seen various different approaches here. I've seen analytics teams that report into IT. I've seen analytics teams that report into somebody like me, like I was a chief transformation analytics officer that fell underneath my remit. I've seen analytics teams under the data organization, and I've seen them, report obviously to the CFO. So there's many different ways to do it, but what I encourage companies that are either thinking about this or evolving it is to think about that being under an area where it's got a broad remit and somebody who's sees the value in becoming more data driven. Because if you think about the work being done in these spaces, it's not just for the analytics team, right? It's actually helping people innovate everywhere, and that's where somebody who has the reach across not just a technology or data organization, but that can speak from a domain expertise level or have the influence of where funding is done that can help create value across various functions or business units. That's really valuable. So I think some of it does come down to that aspect. I'm sorry, I forgot the second part of your question there.
And now let me see. Now I've kind of lost it because I've already unclicked.
That's okay. At least the first part we've got covered, and you can ping me on LinkedIn for the second part.
Was it this? Who should it report to? And
yeah, okay. So how does it change? So
yes, sorry about that. How does that change?
Then one of the changes that some companies observe, and I certainly observe this, is if you start with a center organization, in a lot of cases you're doing work that could be scaled, but then over time your goal is to have that be democratized into your business units or functions. So by very nature, sometimes companies that start with a center of excellence or enablement then end up with taking those talented folks and then having them be representatives, within a business unit or functional area. And I think that's a good thing, because then you get cross-pollination of talent into various levels who are really data-driven and analytic focused, but they also know how to use tools like Alteryx and drive value. So you do see that evolve over time as companies mature, because then you're looking at, in a lot of cases, democratizing those insights into wider spaces.
Right. And so now George has a two-part question, George Firkin. First question is, how long does it take to reach the fifth stage? And then sort of the second part is, can you skip a stage? So.
Yeah, good one, George. I think I'd have to come back to you. I mean, if you think about the stages, I'm not sure how long it would take, but I could say the companies that are in that fifth stage are like your digital natives, some of your airlines, some of the retailers and consumer brands are up in that space. So depending on the folks that are in there, my guess is, none of these happen overnight, because it takes I'll say a multi-flanked approach that we've talked about earlier on this podcast. So I think it takes time to get there. Skipping stages, I've not seen that personally.
Yeah.
I think most companies that I work with, if not all, when they look at those areas and things they need to work on, those things that really dictate your analytics maturity, they're just, how much do I throttle one versus the other? But they're not looking at it from the standpoint of, I wonder if I can skip the org piece or the analytics team. They quickly understand the relevance of all of them, but it's just depending on where they're at in the maturity, they might be investing in teams or technology or automation in one space versus another one year, and then they pivot the next. So I think it's more about the balance of investment across those spaces versus being able to skip. I wish I could have skipped it when I was a practitioner, but actually I think all of them were pretty essential to getting to a point where you're driving significant improvement in analytic maturity.
Right. I guess the only caveat is if you're bought up by another company and now you're just sort of in there.
That's true. Then the cycle may start over, right, Kate?
Right, that's true too. Then you're back to square one, right? While you're trying to figure all that out. We'll take our final question here from Susan, because you talked about sort of the value of data not only being relevant to the data folks. Susan's question here is it hard to communicate to the rest of the business the importance of analytics?
Yeah, I think that it's a good question, Susan. I think what I would observe on that is the communication vehicles are many, but you have to be deliberate about it. So I think if it's something that I mentioned very briefly earlier, but I think when you're seeing progress exist in any given company, you might have one effort that could be $100 million value equation for pricing, or things that are really using analytics and data to drive massive value amounts. Mm-hmm. Those typically get a lot of fanfare, and they're very important. But also when you have somebody that's automating and taking 20 hours out of their week with something that's pretty meaningful, or minimizing risk in a bank, or making some other things that they do more efficient, those are really important when you think about trying to change your culture, because that pricing effort may have been a team working on it, but you also have a much wider group of folks who can benefit from how work is automated and how decisions can change, and how you can really drive innovation at all levels of the organization. Those are really important too. So mechanisms I've seen on communicating are in quarterly communications calls, in analytics days, just by virtue of, I was at one last week at WestRock, and just the fact that the CFO allocated 2 days of his team's time to talk about this topic said something, right? Yeah, and then there are maturing areas of analytics. So I think those are good avenues to do that. Also, hackathons, things that you're able to take challenge sets that you may couldn't solve without analytics and automation before, and then pushing those ahead and having teams that are recognized for that activity. And then there's various areas that I just mentioned there that I think can help advocate for improvements that are being made, and communicating the wins as they occur. They're not all big. They don't all have to be big wins. They can be ones that are kind of your everyday ones, but they add up very quickly.
Yeah, I agree. As long as you can actually showcase the value add to even a couple of individuals, or the time saved and all of that, it already goes a long way. And you're right, it does add up and create a much bigger impact.
For sure. Yeah. And that's the teams, they like to see the big wins, but sometimes the ones that are closer to them, or they can say, okay, I know somebody did this with automation, but I have a very similar use case, I think, where I can probably learn from that person and create something something similar. I think those are really meaningful to get it to scale in a company.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from personal experience, I remember bringing dashboarding and data visualization and reporting into a company, and we started small, and they saw a dashboard, and it sort of trickled down from, "Ooh, I want something like that. How do I do that?" Right? So it starts that conversation just showing something small, and then before you know it, months later, everyone's got their own dashboard and analytics that they're looking at, because now they know the power and a lot of times how easy it is really to pull off with the
Yes.
right technology.
Yep. Good point.
So, Steve, first of all, thank you so much for the time you've taken out of your busy schedule today. I definitely learned a lot. I know the audience learned a lot. I want to thank the audience for their time as well, for tuning in and joining this conversation. As we wrap up, I'd like to ask you, where should people go to either continue the conversation with you or take that assessment? I know Dustin early on had shared the link. I'm assuming that's the right link, but where else can folks go to learn more?
Yeah, you can obviously reach me on LinkedIn directly or at Alteryx at steve.brodrick@alteryx.com. For the analytics maturity assessment, it's very simple. You go to alteryx.com, you go to Connect and Learn, and then within Connect and Learn, there's an analytics maturity assessment. You'll see it right there, right in the open. So I think it's a great tool. I've used it myself. And I think that was a part of just baselining and understanding what we could do in a few years in my past life to drive maturity, in a pretty aggressive way in the company from where it started. And I think you all could do the same or are already on that path, but maybe a little bit more prescriptive help that comes out of that tool, or just a baseline would be helpful for you. So hopefully you all take me up on it, and look forward to staying connected. And by the way, the questions here were fantastic. They're really insightful questions. So kudos to your community for asking some of the tough questions.
Yes, I absolutely love the engagement from the audience. So thank you again for everyone who tuned in. And Steve, thank you again for your time. Everyone who's listening, go take that assessment and follow Steve on LinkedIn. Go check out what Alteryx is up to. Yeah, thank you everybody for joining. Stay dedicated. Have a great rest of your day, your week, and your month, and your year. Actually, we're wrapping up the year soon. All right, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate, for hosting me.